Thrive Heavy Lies the Crown is a deep city builder, rarely multiplayer city builder, with a grand map and real-time strategic combat that I think you'll love. And through the deep political decisions that you make, will you be benevolent or tyrannical, you'll ultimately set the course of a game with your trusted advisors. And thank you to Playside Publishing for sponsoring this video. Thrive Heavy Lies the Crown will be available to play for free during the Steam Next Fest, so check out the link below, click through, give it a wishlist if you like it, and let's roll. Loading into a brand new game, and you're immediately met with a beautiful point of difference as we're tasked to select a province. Each province has its own qualities, attractiveness, and of course, the always important hydration, as well as a series of unique resources to it. Sometimes they're shared around other provinces, but you won't be able to get every resource in one place. And we'll return to that later. As you load through, they also give you a warning. This is but a small demo, a snapshot of release. In my opinion, this is one of the most generous, lengthy, and enjoyable demos that I've ever played at a Steam Next Fest. And one of the other things that'll prove that to you, I think, as we go through, is the decision making. The often moral and sometimes quite difficult decisions that the game tasks you to make. In this case, my advisor's pulling me between wisdom, vigilance, or prosperity. How exactly do we want to get things going here? And where do my interests lie? And they'll be important later on. There's lots of different layers at play here, as you can see, just by zooming out and taking a look at the map. But of course, focusing back in, we're starting with but one province, and here I'm tasked with building the foundations for any good colony, hopefully future city. And this includes things like food and water and the various service buildings and of course raw resources that I'm going to need to gather if I actually want to get something going here. One quick side note, by the way, I think that the lighting effects as dusk and dawn and those integrated with the game's events do a brilliant job at painting this world. Putting that tangent to one side though, the task here of course is to grow, and in this demo version, mostly that's fueled by building more houses and getting people in. And while we bring them in, we also need to take care about other metrics that will also sort of ring fence how we grow and determine how much money we get out of our population. In this case, through housing, we're focused on things like, will houses catch fire? Will someone come and attack them? And the overall needs and luxuries of my people. There are also different grades of workers, if you will. At the moment, just dealing with farmers, things are relatively simple. Happiness will also be a problem. Lower happiness means less money for me and less production. Could also lead through to a riot. And one of the things that might just kick that along are the many events that take place throughout this game. Another thing that I think is a really distinct point of difference inside of Thrive Heavy Lies the Crown. It feels more like a story is being told, and the various advisors will try and steer me in different ways. One perhaps on the right, more aggressive, focused on defense and offense, while my other advisors are more cautious, focused on the needs of the people and building a good empire. My choices, as you can see, will ultimately determine who wins and who loses that argument. And outside of interactions with other players, if you're playing multiplayer, or indeed the AI, this is one of the real ways that you'll make meaningful decisions on the political layer of this game. And of course, they will generally have outcomes, gains or losses, depending on what you decide and whose advice you choose to put your trust in. The events can, of course, also present some pretty negative outcomes, and there's a mystical, mysterious element to the non-government related ones here too inside of this world. Beasts spawning nearby, and again, some beautiful visual effects taking over the map. I mean, just look at how cool that looks. Granted, also there's a fair element of despair taking place here too. On top of these slightly mystical events and also those political decisions that you're making, there's also the fundamental, the physical needs. Fires being perhaps the most prominent. As you can imagine, when you build everything out of wood and straw, you're probably going to suffer from some fires. Now, of course, the game has ways to interact with this, to negate it, and ultimately you'll need to repair your buildings if they burn down. But firehouses, word of advice, very useful. Managing those buildings when they're not on fire is handled up in the top left through the Jobs tab, where you can assign the number of builders you'd like to have in your town, as well as assigning priorities to different workplaces. And as I mentioned in the introduction, while we may be able to get lots of jobs, lots of different crops, buildings, opportunities, we won't be able to get it all inside of but one province. However, we will be able to interact with others, and that becomes particularly important as you move through and start to advance. Here, things like my lumberyard, turning logs into timber, the fermenter, for example, producing much needed ale for my people. These more advanced buildings and supply chains also introduce a new type of people, for example, laborers, who have their own needs and jobs and opportunities. At a wider level, there are also empire-wide edicts that we can enforce, alongside trade, more on that in a moment, diplomacy, and also knowledge, a tech tree of sorts, but again, one that asks you to make difficult decisions. Do you want to go, for example, with an option that gives more efficiency on your existing stockpiles, or reduces their efficiency, but makes their employees work faster? How do you want to progress? What kinds of upgrades do you want to get? And what will you choose to leave behind? Those are the important things that I'm kind of playing off in my mind as I move through and unlock different opportunities inside of the tiers. Trade is also incredibly useful, not just trading like I'm doing here with this traveling merchant to quickly pick up maybe one or two things that I don't quite have enough of, or perhaps even can't produce yet. But the trade system as a whole is one of the beautiful things that helps to tie this game together. Using a caravan, my initial one that I first founded this little settlement with, I can load it up with logs and workers in stone, and then zoom out and find an unclaimed territory. Here, of course, I'm looking at what resources do I need? What resources don't I have? And the scale of the world and all of the different moving parts within it are very impressive, adding that also threatening layer. If you don't choose to go down the diplomatic route, make an alliance, maybe send them a gold gift, then you're going to be zooming in and looking at these cities and thinking, boy oh boy, they've got better stuff than me, and their defenses are looking great, so I'm going to need to improve a bit. And of course, I'll do that at first by establishing these smaller settlements, new colonies. In this case, this place was the only place nearby that could actually produce some wheat. I just didn't have the fertile soil and grounds for it. So, I can produce a trade route, sending, in this case, fairly straightforward, just a bit of wheat from one area to the next. Using a caravan, assigning a name, and selecting a number of resources for the traders' huts in each area to trade, all of a sudden, we're reaching out across the map and establishing multiple colonies within the same game. But of course, as you begin to grow, big for your boots perhaps, establishing yourself across the world, you're going to need some defense and maybe even some offense. And that's where these economic layers all start to thread together with production of something like the armory, for example, bringing resources from different regions, smelting them down, and hopefully creating a strong military. Military preparation takes place across a variety of different buildings, including rations and those defensive buildings that we caught a little glimpse of earlier on. So it's not just your troops, their gear, their food, but also, of course, how you'll defend yourself. The supply chains that are leading into it, again, now more and more advanced, also have that trade-off element to them. Do you want your outfitter to be producing clothing for your people, or leather armor? And if you want it to do both, then you're going to need to get out there and take a whole load more land and resources. Training an army is pretty fun and pretty easy as well. Just input the kind of unit that you like, the amount that you want, and if you have the gear and storage, then you can create those units. Providing, of course, you also have the free population to train into soldiers. This progression, I think, is handled very well. At the start, you're not immediately pushing a warrior out of your very first building, the center of town. You sort of build up through layers, starting relatively simply, gathering a few things. Then as you move through from but your humble farmers to also introducing laborers and more advanced supply chains, you think, oh, okay, this is kind of phase 2. And then those supply chains start to turn into military supply chains. And you feel like you're moving into phase 3. And all of that is on the backdrop of the resource management that we've already talked about and the political decisions. Earlier, my advisors and I decided to reject paying a tithe to the capital, and now all of a sudden, my resources are being stolen. And that is, of course, one of the many ways that the military could come in. with the kinds of hotkeys, unit formations that you would definitely expect. This, my friends, is real-time strategic combat. You can walk around the entire map at that grand view and just zoom in and out and take a look at any target you might like. Moving along the roads will be a bit faster, but of course you can choose to navigate however you like. And providing you've produced the economy and the gear that you need, the military victory should come easily. He says, slightly hesitantly. And as I mentioned in the introduction, you could also take this fight on with friends. Up to 4-player multiplayer is available, something quite rare for this kind of game, though something I haven't tested myself. Thank you so much for joining me. I strongly encourage you to check out Thrive, Heavy Lies the Crown. The link to the demo and the game will be available below. Thanks for watching. See you next time.